Coming up on the Men at the Movies podcast, we conclude our Toy Story series with Toy Story 3. Times of tragedy and trauma can cause us to misinterpret the heart of God. Many times we turn to control the situation, looking for a world without owners, a world free from rejection. As we and the toys discover, in building our own idea of heaven, we find ourselves in prison, slaves to the world we created. Grab your tissues and let's discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being. Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining us for the exciting conclusion of the Toy Story, we're just doing the Toy Story trilogy. We're stopping after number 3, is my Disney guy and expert, Corey Stumne. How are you doing this morning, Corey?
I'm all right, Paul. Are you all right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We've been talking for a little bit. As we mention this quite frequently. We've been like, oh yeah, we've been talking for an hour. I watched this movie a couple days ago, and thankfully my daughter and grandson were here when we started it. They left about halfway through, and when this movie got over, I texted my daughter. I was like, "I am so glad you left before the end of this movie." I have another friend, and who his son's just graduated. This. Coming up in a couple months, he's going to be heading off to college. I said, you know what you need to do? What's going to make it all better is after you drop him off at college is you come back and watch Toy Story 3. And he says, I will never watch that movie again.
Yeah. So if you're listening to the podcast and you haven't seen it, of course we say this all the time, but stop right now and just go watch real quick. But it is definitely one of the more emotional Disney Pixar films that's out there. It just is.
Which is saying a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, we've mentioned this before, but, Pixar is all about trying to put emotions on things that normally don't have emotions. Even with, Inside Out, it was like, what if emotions have emotions? But, this one definitely does can tug at the heartstrings if you allow it to.
And so this is the final episode of this series, our Toy Story series. So just to recap real quick, Toy Story 1, we really talked about what desire drives our hopes, fears, and actions. That was sort of the big question that we discussed. Toy Story 2, it was what sets us apart is the name on our soul, especially focusing on Woody's character and how he was a rescuer, but rescuing in the power in his own strength led to failure, where rescuing in sort of the owner. And in a lot of these ways, Andy is sort of the God surrogate, the God example, the God metaphor. And you even said, Corey, there's a reason metaphors break down, because if they didn't break down, then they'd just be the truth.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, in all these Toy Story movies, in the weeks that we've been talking about these, we've been talking about Andy being the God metaphor. Of course, eventually it all falls down because God's not a child, I guess. Right. He was once, but maybe not anymore. I don't really know, but I'm not a theologian. I just talk about Disney movies. But we talked about that idea that our master's name is written on our soul. And in in those two movies, we basically covered 3 different characters: Woody, Buzz, and Jesse. Woody's thing was basically he just had a fear of being replaced, an irrational fear. An irrational fear. Everyone knows that Andy favored, right, Woody, just like we know that we have God's favor on our lives. And yet still he had an irrational fear of easily being replaced. With Buzz, he had this identity crisis of assuming he was much more important than he actually was. He thought he was a space ranger. And when eventually he becomes humbled and finds out, no, I'm actually not a space ranger, he does a total swings way too far the other way and becomes Mrs. Nesbit, where he doesn't accept his true identity. He's like, well, I'll just be a toy that sits delusional at a tea party. Well, that's not what Buzz is for. Buzz is for, little boys to play with. And then, of course, in the Toy Story 2 episode, we talked about Jessie. And Jessie is just afraid of basically opening up her heart again. She had a owner, she had a master, and she was dumped. And Woody's like, "Hey, you've got to meet Andy. He's great." And she's like, "Yeah, I've been down that path before. No, thank you." So we talked about 3 different characters, and I know today we're going to be talking about a 4th character, a new one that we meet in Toy Story 3.
And it's interesting because you talk about Jessie, and the comparison, I think, when we talk about, we're going to talk a lot about Lotso. Like, as you said that, I was like, man, Jessie, Lotso is what Jessie could have become if she hadn't been rescued by Woody and Andy.
Yeah, Lotso and Jessie were both severely hurt. In different ways, and we're going to talk about that, but both severely hurt by their owner or by their master, and yet they kind of had 2 different reactions to it.
And so before we really get into the themes, I wanted to look at I wanted to ask the question. My buddy who said I will never see this movie again. We watched this, my wife and I, very shortly before. She says it was the week before he went to college. We saw this. And that's a terrible time to watch this movie.
Yes.
Right. But you brought up an interesting idea because you were born in 1990. So you were 5 when the first one came out. You were 9 when the second one came out, and then you're 20. So you're sort of the same age as Andy in these movies, taking that Andy idea.
Yeah, that's why these movies are so special. This Toy Story franchise is, I think, the most special for people my age, current 32-year-olds. Because again, like you said, we grew up with it. It was, in a lot of ways, for some of us, it was our very first movie we ever saw in the theaters, and then we loved it so much that we had to see the second one. And, this is back in VCR days. And so we were just rewinding that VCR, playing it again, all that sort of stuff. The animation back then was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Everything else was hand drawn. And so this looked really, really, really different and cool. And of course, the characters were fun. Everybody's got toys. It's one of the most relatable movies. Every kid wants to know, well, what does happen when I leave? My imagination leaves with me, but what do the toys do? And so I just think Disney and Pixar was like, hey, I bet a way to make some money is to do this one more time. Now that all of these kids are all leaving their own toys behind as they go off to college, let's do this one more time and see what happens. And that's why it's a very, very emotionally pulling, nostalgic movie for people like me.
And then for people like me, who have about 15 years on you, I'm approaching 50 years old now. These are movies that we watched with our kids. So when you watch Toy Story 3 and you get to the end, as Andy goes off to college, our hearts are wrenched because we are the parents in the situation. We're not just giving up toys and the nostalgia and the innocence of childhood. We are letting our children go. We are going through that experience of what is it like, that transition, the challenging transition of what does it mean to be a father when I'm no longer going to soccer games every weekend, when I'm not talking to my kids every day or seeing them every night? What does that look like? And that transition, as any transition is you're trying to rediscover who you are as a dad.
when you saw Toy Story 3, it was emotional for you too, but just in totally different ways, because you also were kind of watching, in a way, something end.
Oh, yeah.
I guess you're kind of watching, a part of your children's childhood kind of come to an end. I guess it would, for us millennial parents, it would kind of be like if we, in 12 years, like the last Bluey episode is Bluey's like an old 12-year-old healer with a bunch of tumors and just dies of old dog age. I don't know. Are you saying that's what it's kind
That's what it'll be like, yeah.
Hey, Bluey has gotten in trouble recently for being really realistic, and so I do believe that maybe that will be how they close the series.
Blue and my grandson, and I'll have to go through that with my grandson, who's watching Bluey all the time and loves Bluey and dinosaurs and all those things. Basically in your 30s, you're looking at this, you're associating with Andy of it is more about the loss of childhood transitioning to adulthood. As Paul said, when I was a child, I thought as a child, did things as a child. Now I'm mature. I do think as a man, I do, adult things. For people in their 40s and 50s, this is a movie they watched with their kids. And for them, it hits deeper because for them, it's their child leaving and the loss of the child, and this is where grandkids are great, because it's like, oh, I'd love to spend a day with my 5-year-old daughter, who's now 21. Well, I have my 3-year-old grandson. I can sort of re-experience those tender moments. I'm not going to, walk around holding my daughter's hand, but I can walk around holding my grandson's hand because he's 3 and he loves his papa. So
right.
It's an interesting dynamic and attention when you look at it from the different perspectives and how these movies can hold the stories can be looked at from a certain perspective, depending on who the watcher is.
Right. That's right.
So sort of to wrap up our big conversation, I was reading, is looking at Wikipedia about Toy Story 3. And this guy wrote in his review, this is A.O. Scott of the New York Times. He said, this film, the whole 3-part, 15-year epic about the adventures of a bunch of silly plastic junk, turns out also to be a long, melancholy meditation on loss, impermanence, and that noble, stubborn, foolish thing called love. I was like, hey, that's a pretty good wrap up of this series of our conversations.
Yeah, melancholy. Slow, long, and at the end of the day, it is about this, stubborn little thing that even plastic toys go through, I guess, love. So I do like that. Each toy, as you know, and this is true of all of us, if Andy's the God metaphor, then we just got to find the toy that we kind of identify best with. Hey, that one's kind of like me. I think I'll choose Evil Dr. Porkchop. But you identify with a toy and you say that one's kind of like me, and you learn that each toy, they are all trying to figure out how at least how to deal with the idea of being loved. And of course, some of them deal really well, some of them seek it out, and some of them don't deal well. And that's kind of what we see in Toy Story 3 is there's one character who really does not deal well.
Right. And so just if you haven't seen it, you're not going to see it because you're like, well, this sounds like a terrible movie to experience, but I want to hear what you guys have to say about it. The synopsis of the movie is, Andy's grown up. He's 17 or 18. He's getting ready to go off to college. The toys have been in their toy box, haven't been played with probably for years. As because he's messing with his phone. He's on his computer. He's a 17-year-old kid who doesn't play with dinosaurs and cowboys and slinky dogs. And so the toys are in crisis because they're like, are we going to go to the attic? We don't want to go to the trash. What are we going to do? And they end up getting donated to a daycare. And that goes poorly. And then they go the whole thing is, how do we escape from Lotso, who's sort of the head bear, the person in charge of the daycare prison that turns out to be. How do we escape from him, and get back to Andy before he goes to college? And then the sort of the culminating, powerful, heart-wrenching moment of the movie is when Andy passes on his toys to a new little girl, Bonnie. And again, going with the God metaphor, as he's passing them on, he's giving them an identity, telling her who these toys are, entrusting them to her care. Again, the metaphor breaks down but I think it breaks down in an interesting way, because what the toys go through, in the beginning of the movie, as Andy's taking care of cleaning up his room, what he does is he puts the toys in a trash bag. Not because they're trash, but just because it was handy and convenient. And he is going to the attic, gets distracted, leaves the bag on the floor. Mom sees the bag on the floor, figure he's lazy, as moms of 17-year-olds will. They're like, really? You just going to leave this in the middle for me to trip over? And takes it to the trash. That was not his intention. But for the toys, they're like, we're junk, we're getting thrown out. And like many of us, misinterpret the heart of God. When we go through things that appear as if we're being thrown away, that appear as if we're being discarded, so many of the Psalms deal with the idea, and one of them even says, my God, why have you forsaken me? David talks about, I look at the wicked and they prosper, and I wonder why my life is so hard, basically.
Yeah, and we don't even... yes, we misinterpret the heart of God, but it's simply that's the second step. We misinterpret the heart of God because we misinterpret our situation. People just assume, why are bad things happening to me? A question that everyone asks multiple times throughout their lives. Why are bad things happening to me? And I think a lot of times we look to God and think, God, what the heck? Why are bad things happening to me?
If you loved me, I wouldn't be put in a trash bag.
Right. But, I try to tell my teenagers at church all the time, we have to remember that bad things happen to us because at the very, very bottom, like the very, very core of the answer, is because we're sinners. And because we're sinners, we live in a super messed up, broken world. That doesn't mean that you have cancer because God's punishing you because you are a sinner, but cancer exists because we are sinners at the end of the day. I know that's hard to hear, but our sin has broken the world. And because of the world's brokenness, now there is brokenness, and so a lot of times I think we misinterpret our situation. And then once we do that, then we go and we misinterpret God's heart. And God's like, I wasn't throwing anybody away. I'm actually trying to help you. But we feel that plastic trash bag. And, we're like, oh, what's going on? And I just think that's so often God's heart gets a bad rap because we are poor judges of what's actually going on around us.
Yeah, and what does Paul say in Romans 8? That all of creation is groaning, because, as you said, we're all of creation was placed under the burden of sin. It's become broken, apart from God, and we see that. So the toys they end up getting rescued from the trash. They're going to go to the daycare. And we're going to introduce Lotso, who we're going to talk about a lot. Not to hit that word twice, but we're really going to focus on, when you look at where do we take those feelings of abandonment? Where do we take the feelings of, in Lotso's story, of being replaced, of being lost, forgotten, whatever, however you want to frame it. We look for a way to soothe our hurt hearts. oh, this feels forgotten. I've got to take care of myself. I've got to handle myself. I've got to go do this. And so I'm going to play this clip where we meet Lotso, where he welcomes Andy's toys to the daycare. And then Corey, I want you to talk about this idea that you shared before, this idea of daycare as a God substitute.
Well, hello there. I thought I heard new voices. Welcome to Sunnyside, folks. I'm Lotso Huggin' Bear, but please call me Lotso.
Buzz Lightyear, we come in.
First thing you gotta know about me, I'm a hugger. Oh, look at you all. You've been through a lot today, haven't you?
Oh, it's been horrible.
Well, you're safe now. We're all cast-offs here. We've been dumped, donated, yard sales, second-handed, and just plain thrown out. But just you wait. You'll find being donated was the best thing that ever happened to you.
Mr. Lotso, do toys here get played with every day?
All day long, 5 days a week.
But what happens when the kids grow up?
Well, now I'll tell you. When the kids get old, new ones come in. When they get old, new ones replace them. You'll never be outgrown or neglected, never abandoned or forgotten. No owners means no heartbreak.
Yeehaw! It's a miracle.
And you wanted us to stay at Andy's.
Because we're Andy's toys.
So you got donated by this Andy, huh? Well, it's his loss, Sheriff. He can't hurt you no more.
Whoa.
Now
No,
let's
no,
get you all settled in.
I think they did a really good job of casting Lotso. I tried to look him up. I couldn't really tell who exactly it was. I didn't really recognize him, but man, he's just got a really good, like, calm, welcoming, warm grandpa voice. And
Ned Beatty.
I don't know who that is. Maybe I should.
Oh, he's an actor. He was in Deliverance. Was really what he's known for. Superman, the old OG Superman's Rudy.
I've heard of his name. I just couldn't tell you. Yeah. I haven't seen Deliverance.
You'd recognize him if you saw him.
Yeah. He says, "Hey, no owner, no heartbreak." Right. Yep. That's a big line there. No master, no heartbreak. And I think a lot of people think that way about God. I'm wondering if people who choose to cast off this idea of God, because again, I think the book of Romans kind of suggests at their very, very core, everyone kind of has an idea that there is something out there. The early part of Romans, God's made it plain that he exists. Everyone there's no excuses because God has made it abundantly plain. And yet I think there's a lot of people who try their very, very best to cast away the idea that there is possibly a God out there who maybe even loves them. And, I think they do this because, hey, I've seen people who believe in God, who say that they love God, and it looked like they got thrown out. Looked like a bad thing happened to them. Looks like they got hurt. And therefore, if you don't have a master and if you don't have an owner, then you don't have a heartbreak. A lot of people associate God with pain, God with a heartbreak, God with a story, and not a good one. And I don't know if you could hear, but in that scene, Woody is trying desperately because really it's Woody's voice versus Lotso's voice, and the rest of the toys have to pick a side. Lotso says, "This is a great place. You're in Sunnyside daycare, right?" And did you notice what he said? He said, "What happens when all of your owners or masters, all of these kids, what happens when they get old?" Well, they just get replaced with new ones. And what happens when those ones get old? They get replaced with newer ones. It's a cycle. It's a cycle, right? And Woody is trying desperately to say, hey, listen, we have one owner, a real one, a true one, and he really does love us. This was a mistake. You are misjudging the circumstance that you found yourself in that trash bag. You're misjudging this. You don't understand. And so it's Woody's voice versus Lotso's voice. And in a lot of ways, Woody is advocating, if we can step out of the movie and step into our spiritual conversation, Woody's advocating for, hey, listen, your heart belongs to one true master that really does love you. No matter what your circumstances, one true master that really does love you. And what Lotso is advocating is he's saying one true master who loves you. How's that feel? It does, like right now, it does not feel good. Looks like you got abandoned. And so Lotso opens the toy's eyes to, and here's our, again, stepping outside of the movie into a spiritual conversation. Lotso opens their eyes to hundreds and hundreds of God substitutes, things that feel like God, things that look like God, things that sometimes even act like God. Children, right? Lots and lots of children. And yet, he says, you don't have to worry about getting replaced because these things actually grow old and tired and weary and they will leave and then I'll just replace them. There are more things and your heart can feel full. Like the toys, they are going to get played with. In fact, the first day of, we don't have this clip, but the very first day of daycare, the toys are so excited. Places everybody, Buzz calls. They're so excited. And Rex walks up to the front door and he's like, I'm so excited. And then the door busts open, and in a moment of a comical pause, we realize that they're in the toddler room, and the toddlers do not play nice. There's slobber, there's sneezes, there's gunk. They rip tails off of toys. They chew on things, and it actually turns out to be not that great. And they were played with, no doubt, but it wasn't like being held by their one true owner. And sure, they could swap out. The toddlers will grow up and they'll be replaced by new ones. But at the end of the day, what the toys in the movie find out is that, and I think there's a sermon here, is that,
that's why we're doing it.
They find out that hundreds and hundreds of God's substitutes don't cut it. It's not like, oh, here's a God substitute versus God. It's like, no, here's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of replaceable things, and this does not cut it. This is not what we're interested in. This is not what we're going for. And I think the clip didn't go as quite this far, but what happens shortly after that is Woody starts giving out his own advice that Bo Peep gave him in the first movie, right? And in that how it goes, ministry is really just, it's giving out advice that you were ministered to with long time ago, right? Nothing news under the sun. In the first movie, when Woody is struggling, if he's going to get replaced by Buzz, what does Bo Peep say? She says, Woody, lift up your foot and look at the bottom, and he sees that Andy's name is written on his soul. And so Woody in Toy Story 3, after Lotso's proving his and trying to convince all these toys, hey, these substitutes will work. Your heart will be full. You will be happy forever here. Woody pleads with the rest of the toys. He says, look at your feet, please. Really quick, just look at your feet. And he's like, you have an owner. You have one. And I think there's a really, really big thing that we need to see here and apply it to our own situations and our own lives so that we can be good interpreters of what's actually going on.
Mm-hmm.
I think for some people, and maybe this is us listening, maybe it's other people. For some people that we know, having our master's name written on our soul is enough to ground us no matter what the situation is. No matter if we find ourselves in a trash bag, in the dumpster, or heading toward a fiery furnace, like how these toys eventually, where they find themselves in. But for some people, having your master's name written on your soul is enough to ground you. And for some people, something as simple as a different circumstance or a new role, even if it's a demoted role in this case, right? It doesn't matter whose name is written on their soul. Different circumstances or new roles or a change in scenario or scenery can alter where people's allegiance lies and where it falls. And I know that we've seen this before because I have seen youth group families that were literally core families, like very core. And I'm not joking. I'm thinking of a specific story, and I'm trying not to tell the story. Something happened at church, and it made a mom mad. It made the mom mad. And so even though they were core family, just instantly, boom, pulled everybody out, went to a new church, right? I mean, I guess that's fine. But it didn't take long. They weren't connected there. And now they don't go to a church. And I just get this sense that even though they were Christians or are Christians, the name written on their soul was not enough to ground them when something went wrong. And their allegiance fell very quickly. And so, again, I've preached about a 7-minute sermon, so you're going to eventually have to jump in, Paul, or I'll just keep going. But it does seem like this is a really great kind of, if we're using our metaphor, a spiritual battle between the way of Lotso and the way of Woody, and all the toys are at stake.
Well, and what I wrote down from as you were talking is that idea of where do you go when it gets hard? When life gets hard, when things don't go the way you hoped, the way you thought. And we talk about this a lot on the podcast because we deal with it a lot. It's one of our greatest struggles. And again, going back to Romans 6, Paul's talking about this freedom language. And he said, you can readily recall, can't you, how at one time, the more you did just what you felt like doing, not caring about others, not caring about God, the worse your life became and the less freedom you had. And how much different is it now as you live in God's freedom, your lives healed and expansive in holiness? And what Lotso is offering is the same thing Satan offers, the same thing the world offers. You've been through a lot. Poor you. You've had a hard day. We've all been thrown out here. We've all been abandoned. We've all been neglected. And it's like, are we going to get played with? Because in their years of abandonment, relationship became less important and being played with became paramount. Where do we go when it gets hard? What do we seek? What are we pursuing? Are we looking for, I just want to get played with? And what Lotso promises, I mean, they got played with, but they got played with by people, by things who couldn't handle their heart, who didn't really care about them. And what we seek in the world, it turns out the same way. Whether, it's affairs, whether it's porn, it's alcohol, it's work. The more you give your heart to something that's not actually handling your heart well, and that's what they wrote in Proverbs 4, it says, guard your heart, for from it flow the springs of life. For life comes from your heart. And if we don't guard it, if we're giving it to things, to people, to activities that don't handle it well, we end up in Lotso's position. Because, spoiler alert, Lotso's the bad guy.
Right.
Because what appears to be heaven, what appears to be everything they were searching for, when they age out, you'll get played with. You won't go a day, except weekends, when you won't get played with, is really a prison. Oh no, you can't leave. You can't even hang out. You're going to get put into a bin every night where you can't escape. You can't do anything. There's somebody always watching to make sure you don't step out of line. You need to go through your trauma. You need to take this for the team because we've been through it. We've been through the trauma of the toddler room and we've graduated. It's like, oh, well, and it's like the carrot, right? The carrot's always going to be out of reach. The more we chase it, the farther it actually feels like it's getting. And as you said, that we've talked many times on the podcast how hurt people. And you said hurt toys.
Right.
Because Lotso's story is he was loved. He did things with his owner, Daisy, and they didn't get left. They didn't get forgotten. They didn't get thrown out. They were forgotten, but not by Daisy. They were forgotten by her parents because Daisy fell asleep and they left her at this rest stop. And by the time they get home, because Daisy was so traumatized, they bought her a new Lotso bear. And so in that moment, he's with two other toys and they said, "Oh, she's replaced us." They're like, "No, she just replaced you." It's like, no, if I can't have her, no one can. And we'll get to that sort of epiphany and that tirade towards the end of the movie. But what we see is when God hurts us, when God disappoints us, we don't go back to him for it. We take it in our own hands. We try to manipulate. We try to create a life that works for us so that it doesn't hurt. And that's what I love. I love the stories of Mary and Martha. Because Jesus had to trust them with allowing Lazarus to die. Like, he heard Lazarus was sick, so he stayed where he was 2 more days. He didn't even need to leave. He could have probably not even verbally. He could have just said, whatever, Lazarus be healed. He doesn't need to be in the room. He's proved that by now. But he knew that when he showed up, they would show up. They would still trust him. And Martha comes out and says, "You can do anything. You are the resurrection." He's like, if you say something, they still allow him to come in. They still turn to him even in their grief and their sorrow. They don't turn to anger, to bitterness, to loss, to control, which we so often do in those moments.
I really do think Lotso's a great character because he is so trustworthy at the front. There's even a part, if you've seen the movie and you remember what I'm talking about, there's a part where you could tell they're kind of bad guy toys. There's kind of a group of bad guy toys, and they capture Buzz Lightyear because they capture him and kind of interrogate him. And Lotso walks in the room and says, "No, like, what are we? This is not how we treat our." And you're like, okay, so he is initially very, very kind and warm and welcoming. But the things that he offers are the things that are intentionally trying to pull you away from your one true owner. Because at the end of the day, if you get pulled away from your one true owner, that's actually the thing that serves Lotso the best. Because Lotso kind of was running Sunnyside Daycare from a toy perspective. And he was played with every day by the 5 and 6 year olds who actually did play well and did hold everybody nice. And so while he maybe did have, I'm not going to say true heaven, because obviously he didn't have a relationship with these kids. Again, this was, like you were hinting at, kind of just more of a pleasure thing where he gets filled for just a little bit and then they leave and go home that night. He made other people go to the toddler room, which is so funny that we're saying that the toddler room was hell. But yeah,
I would agree with that. But that he uses the phrase "become masters of your own destiny."
Masters of our own fate, I think is what he says. And yeah, I mean, his big thing is his big message is we don't need owners. We don't need masters. We're owners of our own self, is what he says. And if that's not like, a message that you hear every single day in our world today, I mean, you're just not listening. That message is so prevalent. Live your own truth. Be your own self. The Bible says your own self is kind of rotten at its core, unfortunately. that you need to be you need to try to be transformed into somebody else, somebody that looks a whole lot more like Jesus. Again, so I just really do appreciate and enjoy the really strong tension between Woody and Lotso and what they're both trying to convince the toys. And like we said, the toys buy into Lotso. He's got a good message. But what they find out is, yikes, this is not what we signed up for.
But that's how sin works. That's how the world works, is it makes you promises. And again, that's all what Paul says is you didn't have to bother with anything. You weren't free. What felt free of doing whatever you want isn't actually free. I know so many guys who are like, they're believers. They're pursuing a deeper walk with God, but they still struggle with porn. They do what they don't want to do because it still governs them. And that's the governance, is where are we going when it gets hard? If it's not God, if it's porn, if it's work, if it's drugs, if it's alcohol, if it's all these things, then that's all just, we're still slaves to it. It could be the sense of belonging. It could be where you get your identity from. I have to have everybody's approval. If I don't have approval, if I'm not liked by everyone, then I'm failing, then I'm dying. The idea of what feels like death is typically we have to go through that in order to find life. And Lotso, the interesting thing, if Lotso had shown back up with, Baby and Chuckles the clown at Daisy's doorstep, who would have been replaced? The new guy, because that's the one she loved. That's the one she left. Those are the one, like, they would have been welcomed back in, but he saw her with a new Lotso bear and didn't trust her heart. And so we're going to jump, because Woody gets out. He understands that his friends are in prison. He goes back to rescue them, because that's, as we talked about in Toy Story 2, he's a rescuer, but he's rescuing now with sort of for Andy. And he stands up, as you said, the contrast between Woody's voice and Lotso's voice. And again, what we hear Lotso saying is the same thing I hear so many people say today about our purpose, what we are, and the emptiness of trusting God, of trusting religion, of trusting faith. It's like, you can't trust that because of who we are at the end of the day. And if you believe what Lotso says, you're going to live just as empty of a life.
What are y'all doing? Running back to your kid? He don't want you no more.
That's a lie.
Is it? Tell me this, Sheriff. If your kid loves you so much, why is he leaving? You think you're special, cowboy? You're a piece of plastic. You were made to be thrown away. Speak of the devil. I didn't throw you away. Your kid did. Ain't one kid ever loved a toy, really. Chew on that when you're at the dump.
Wait. What about Daisy?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Daisy? You used to do everything with her?
Yeah, then she threw us out.
No, she lost you.
She replaced us.
She replaced you. And if you couldn't have her, then no one could. You lied to Big Baby, and you've been lying ever since.
Where'd you get that?
She loved you, Lotso.
She never loved me.
As much as any kid ever loved a toy.
What? You want your mommy back? She never loved you. Don't be such a baby. Push them in, all of them. This is what happens when you dummies try to think. We're all just trash, waiting to be thrown away. That's all a toy is.
And what Woody had that he's showing them is the tag that Lotso had ripped off the baby that's had Daisy's name on it. Written not on his soul, but on his heart.
Yep. I mean, he had just been so hurt and had sat in such bitterness, which is just funny that we do need to stop and kind of just chuckle that we're talking about such big things, and we're talking about a stuffed bear. But he had sat with such bitterness for so many years I mean, think about it. Lotso's problem is the exact same problem that all the other of Andy's toys had, is they misinterpreted the situation. And therefore, they misinterpreted their owner's heart. The other toys, they found themselves in a trash bag. Because they were just simply being carried upstairs into the attic. They thought that they were actually being thrown away. Lotso found himself in a ditch. And, it's raining. Well, it's because his master, Daisy, was playing with him, but she fell asleep because she's a kid. And Mom and Dad didn't know he was down there, and so he got left. It was an accident. It was a bad thing that happened, an unfortunate thing. And he misinterprets the situation. So he assumes Daisy threw him away, but he actually is totally wrong. He felt his master hurt him, but nobody hurt him. It was just an accident. And like we said, hurt toys. His brokenness turned him to a monster. And if you're listening to the podcast and you listen to the Moana episode, we talked about this idea. In a lot of ways, Te Fiti in Moana is kind of the same character as Lotso. Kind of the same character, but they do have different endings. Te Fiti has a happy ending, and Lotso does not.
But the difference between Te Fiti and Lotso and their endings is what they do when they're offered their heart.
Yeah.
Te Fiti accepts her heart and becomes restored. Lotso takes the heart that was offered and smashes it. When we are going to have a moment in time where even in our rage and in our bitterness, we're going to be offered something that can restore our heart, that can restore truth. Even Ken's like, this place could be groovy, man.
And we haven't even talked about Ken yet.
Right?
Ken and Barbie, hilarious. Sunnyside could be cool and groovy if we all just got along.
Right. Because again, Ken accepts who he is, his identity, and doesn't try to manipulate, doesn't try to control, we see in the post during the clips of how he establishes a new regime of, everybody's rotating that,
cool
it's very fair. It's utopia. It's cool and groovy. But yeah, so going back to Lotso in that moment, how he responds and contrasting between Te Fiti and Lotso. I just thought it was interesting. They were both offered their hearts. Te Fiti accepted it. Lotso smashed it.
I love that. I think that's just so good and such great insight, Paul. Again, if you'd have to have seen the movie Moana, I'm not going to summarize the whole thing right now, but there's a monster, and in order for the monster to return to who she originally was, Moana has to give her, quite literally, her rock. It's her heart. It's the heart of Te Fiti.
Yeah.
And when she does, then all of the hard exterior melts away. Quite literally, all the hard exterior melts away to discover that there truly is life underneath all of that. Lotso is given a heart that says the name Daisy on it, and he smashes it. At the end of the day, there is just a choice. No matter how hurt, no matter how broken you become, you always have a choice. God is going to give you opportunities for full restoration, for full healing. And there are people that don't want that. Not because they wouldn't like to be. I think everyone would like to be healed. But here's the deal. I think when you accept healing and when you accept restoration, you also, in a way, and I think this is true with every type of healing, even just physical healing at a hospital, you have to accept you can't do this by yourself. You're not strong enough. Is anyone strong enough to heal themselves? It isn't healing and restoration isn't the big concept of that is actually something that's done for you, not by you. And so if God offers restoration for our hearts and healing to our hearts and restores us, If we accept that, we are accepting two things. Number one, yes, I am broken and I have become a monster. And number two, yes, there's nothing I can do about this. You've got to help me. And so maybe healing and restoration actually, while they restore us to our original state, they also are a strong attack on our pride. If that's there, if that pride monster is there, it's a strong attack on that. And for sometimes people don't want their pride to be attacked.
Again, going back to Romans 6, it just keeps kind of speaking to me about this is, at the end of the chapter, Paul's writing, as long as you did what you felt like doing, ignoring God, you didn't have to bother with right thinking or right living or right anything for that matter. But do you call that a free life? Was Lotso living a free life? What did you get out of it? Nothing you're proud of now. Where did it get you? A dead end. But now that you've found you don't have to listen to sin tell you what to do, and have discovered the delight of listening to God telling you, what a surprise. A whole, healed, put together life right now with more and more of life on the way. Work hard for sin your whole life and your pension is death. And we see that with Lotso at the end of the movie. But God's gift is real life, eternal life, delivered by Jesus, our master. So God's gift is life. And that's what we see, again, in this movie. And Lotso is unable to accept it. He's unable to receive it. He chooses to continue living his life of a slave to sin, a slave to his pride, as you said, because it is pride to say, look at what she did to me. I can't let that go. And earlier in the chapter, Paul says, you can't give sin a vote. You must not give sin a vote in the way you live your life. Because if you do, you're just going to follow that path that leads to death. And again, what does Lotso say? He's like, toys are just a piece of plastic. Our end is to be thrown away. And that's what, again, so much of the world says is there's nothing to this. When you die, you just go back. You're just atoms and particles and dust. And if that's what you believe, then there is no reason to try to do anything other than get all you can out of this life. Pleasure, seek meaning, seek whatever it is that you think is going to work. But if you believe that once you die, you're just dead and go into the eternal blackness, that nothing that you do matters, then that is a hopeless, meaningless life to live in. And that's what Lotso is like. Why even? He's like, we're all going to end up in the great fiery furnace, the incinerator at the end. And even as the toys are on their way to it, and Lotso manages to stand up, he could stop a button. He could press a button that allows all the toys to find freedom.
You're talking about when they're in the tunnel, right?
Yeah, when they're in the tunnel, they're heading towards certain death. They're heading towards where all garbage goes to get burned.
So for all the people who maybe aren't quite following this is almost immediately after that dumpster scene where Lotso smashes the daisy heart or whatever. They actually do get thrown into the garbage truck. They take them to the pit or the garbage dump or wherever, dump them in, and I don't know what you describe this, but it's like the trash conveyor belt, and it's all pushing all the trash toward quite literally a fiery furnace. And Lotso has an opportunity. He finds a ladder and runs up, and he has an opportunity to hit the emergency stop button while all the other toys are on the conveyor belt. And he doesn't. He doesn't hit it. And what's his line that he says?
Where's your kid now?
Yeah. He looks at Woody and says, where's your kid now? And I do think that there's something really, really pertinent in that, right? Which, by the way, I mean, again, we didn't mention this. Woody is the one that pushed him up to the ladder. So Woody helps him. Woody's saving him. Once again, Woody's
he had saved him when they were going to go into the grinder. He went back for him.
Woody is just,
because he's a rescuer,
a self-sacrificial rescuer. And Lotso has the opportunity to give it right back to everybody and chooses not to, and then runs away after he says, "Where's your kid now?" And again, obviously, with our metaphor, he's saying, "Hey, where's your God now?" I mean, that line is used in the Bible sometimes. People mocking God, assuming he's not going to show up, assuming that he has abandoned us.
When you're at the funeral home, when you're in the hospital, when you lose your job, and tragedy strikes, when life gets hard, where's your God now?
For everybody who has felt abandoned by God, for everybody who has misjudged his heart, I get this sense that when there are people who experience, and I mean really, really deep spiritual pain, that they assume has been brought on by God, misery loves company. And people don't want to sit in that by themselves. They want you to feel that deep spiritual pain. And so Lotso's asked himself the question plenty of times, where's my kid now? Well, abandon me, right? And he wants these other toys to feel the exact same way. And so I'm wondering, for anybody who's listening, I'm wondering for anybody who does, who the Bible would say is blessed to receive some, forms of persecution. That doesn't mean you're getting burned alive at the stake. It, could mean you're not welcomed at the, at the water jug in the office, and it's difficult for you socially at your place of work, or you're made fun of at school, or whatever it might be. I'm wondering if we can just reshape sometimes when we are chastised because of our faith in God. Or we are maybe made to feel less, or whatever it might be. I'm wondering if it would just be helpful if we could hear Lotso the bear saying, "Hey, where's your kid now?" And realizing, man, he himself has felt very, very hurt from his own child. Was it true? No. Is he wrong? Yes. But what's the phrase? Your perspective is reality. Is that the phrase I'm looking for?
It could be.
Yeah, like how you see things is how you see things. You can't help it, right? So if we ask ourselves the question, why do other people need to feel the need to make me feel spiritual pain or anguish? We just need to be reminded it's because whether they want to admit it or not, they feel that as well. They just do. They just do. At their very, very, very core, at the very bottom of it, they feel these things too, and they want company. And I don't know. I really do think that doesn't Woody have a fantastic character arc in these three movies? The first one, he is just so selfish and he's so caught up in himself. And the minute someone else that's nice shows up, he fears that he's going to get replaced. And in Toy Story 1, just being angry with Buzz the entire time because Buzz doesn't get it. Right? How many times do we see a new Christian become angry with people who just don't get it? But then in Toy Story 2, like you said, he becomes a rescuer of Jessie, who's not an enemy. She's a neutral person. But in Toy Story 3, he becomes a rescuer of the enemy. I mean, it's quite the narrative, the character arc for him. I'm hoping that as we kind of conclude this series, because I know we're approaching our ending point. I'm hoping that as we conclude, yes, we see Buzz and Jessie and Lotso and all these other toys that we can connect with, but I'm hoping that we really do. We are able to hopefully be inspired by Woody's character arc and by his story, and come to understand that no matter what our deficits are at the beginning of our story, eventually God's called all of us to be rescuers, even rescuers of the enemy, even to our own detriment and our own self-sacrificial life. Woody's got a great character arc, and I think I just really I'm very grateful for the way that God has opened our eyes to see parts of his story in this really fun story called Toy Story.
As we conclude this little mini series, this 3-episode deep dive into the Toy Stories 1 through 3, and when we get to the end and we see it, because endings are hard, and you see that whatever series, the Friends episodes that ended their series, the Cheers episode, the MASH episode, these beloved characters, and that's what they are. They're beloved characters because we experience their reflection of the toys' love for Andy. And we're not going to play anything from the last scene, but I think what makes this movie hit so hard emotionally is because we say 3 goodbyes. We see that emotional as the toys are heading towards the furnace. They're holding hands, and that's sort of the first emotional hit. And they get rescued from the claw, a little humor with Lotso, and then they get back to Andy's. And then the toys are saying goodbye to Woody because Woody's going to go into college. The toys are going to go to the attic. And so we see that goodbye. We see the mom say goodbye. I wish you were always here. And then Woody, we see him write a note, and we'll find out he jumps in the box because he doesn't want to be apart from his family. Right? We see Andy pass on his toys to Bonnie. And like we said, that's where the metaphor sort of breaks down. And it strikes me that God's gift is real life, eternal life. And the toys, life in the attic isn't real life. Although I do think if it was me, I'm saving toys to play with Andy's kids, right? When Andy has children, hey, here's my toys. I think that's an appropriate ending. But again, from the toys' perspective, that's not real life. Because their purpose is to love a master, to be played with, and be in that relationship. And I'm sure that Bonnie will end up putting her name on the toys. So they sort of do experience an eternal life, even if they're, like we said, the metaphor breaks down. But the reason that that's such a powerful moment is because we've all had to let go of stuff that's dear to us. We've all had to say goodbye. We've all had to go through those transitions. I remember hearing this thing, and I can't remember if it was like in therapy or I was reading a book, but when we experience something like a goodbye, like the ending of something, it's not just that ending that we're grieving, but it's every ending we've experienced. And so when we watch that scene at the end of the movie and we find ourselves getting emotional, it's not just because of that. It's because our hearts remember all the other tragedies and difficulties that we've experienced. And grieving is not bad. Grieving is not a sin. Feeling abandoned isn't the tragedy. It's when we take that grief, it's when we take that tragedy and we go seek our own. We seek our identity outside of what the truth of what God says to us and the power of the gospel. That's where we find eternal life. A rich, full, wholehearted, healed life is when we can take that grief. And again, going back to the Psalms of, yeah, David asked a lot, God, where are you? I need you. But he took it to God. He didn't try to fix it, find his own solutions. He took it to God for his rescue. And that's the one we have to trust, even in our moments of grief and tragedy. So, Corey, thanks for doing this. This was your idea to go through this and see, because it's not these three movies are not cookie cutters of each other. And very similar to the original Star Wars trilogy, it's one big story. If we look at the story of either of Andy's moving from childhood to adulthood, of, as you mentioned, Woody's arc of who he was at the beginning of Toy Story to who he is today, where he can even go back to rescue the enemy, I thought was really good. So thanks for sharing your insight and your wisdom in that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And of course, I always love being a part of the show. And for anybody who's listening, and I'd like to offer this as we kind of close. For anybody who's listening and they love Disney movies, and you're like, oh man, haven't seen my favorite Disney movie done yet. Email Paul, email Minute the Movies. Let us know, and we'd love to do it because while it does seem like the possibilities are endless, it's always fun to talk about things that people want to talk about.
Yeah.
And so. This was a lot of fun. It was so fun. In fact, I know I mentioned this to you, but can you steal your own material? I'm stealing all of this. Our camp theme this summer is going to be based off of Toy Story and identity. And so, and that'll be basically right when this episode comes out, we'll be at camp. It'll be a lot of fun. I really do appreciate it. And of course, Paul, I think I speak for everybody. We all appreciate your hard work in this podcast and how it reaches a lot of different people with with the same gospel message in a lot of fun, creative ways.
Well, I appreciate that, Corey, and we'll be praying for you at youth camp that your workshopping here on the podcast will help create a very focused and intentional and a message that really hits the hearts of the teenagers that you're interacting with, and maybe even some of the adults there.
Oh, I think it will. Yeah.
So if you have any ideas, comments, suggestions, feel free to email us at paul@minutethemovies.com. And this has been Paul McDonald and Corey Stumne talking about Toy Story 3. We hope you guys liked it. We hope you enjoyed it. And hopefully we didn't make you cry. And if you're really looking for a good cry, go check out the movie. And hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?